Om asato ma sadagamaya tamaso maham jyotirgamaya mrityurmam amritam gamaya. Avir, avir, maedhi, rudra, yate, dakshinam, mukha, te namaham, pahi nityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is the psychic and the spiritual. Two concepts that are often confused. Certainly that was true around the turn of the century when Swami Vedarupananda came to America. Vivekananda was the first Indian yogi to open the window to the light of the East, to come to America and to preach the Vedanta philosophy. But the way had been prepared somewhat beforehand by the transcendentalist, four influences. The transcendentalist movement of Emerson and Thoreau, the theosophical movement. Theosophy taught karma, reincarnation, plus Western occultism. Third influence, the New Thought movement, very liberal Christianity, churches such as Unity, the Unitarians, and Christian Science. And the fourth influence was the founding in 1894 of the first American Society for Psychical Research. And members of all of these movements, prominent teachers, metaphysicians, magnetic healers, met together in Greenacre, Maine for a spiritual religious conference of which Swami Vedarupananda was a participant, as was the famous New Thought writer Ralph Waldo Emerson. You remember his book, In Tune with the Infinite. So there were a lot of prominent people there at that conference, referred to the teachers that Swami Vivekananda in one letter referred to humorously as teachers of metaphysico, chemico, physical, religioso, whatnot. And we can see that in that environment, it was easy to confuse psychism and spiritualism and occultism and spirituality. And teachers of religious traditions from most ancient times anticipated this and made efforts to discriminate between these different concepts. And this morning we're focusing on one, that is on the discrimination between the psychic, and the spiritual. Now let's start here with the psychic. Psychic, of course, has come from the Greek psyche, which is the New Testament word for soul. The psyche is the mind, it's the soul. And the psyche that is the soul in Christian theology, has certain natural powers. That is, they are potential powers. They are, we could call them abilities, which manifest as capabilities. Physical, such as we have the capability of walking and talking. Sensory, we have the capability of seeing and hearing and touching. And mental, we have the ability of thinking, feeling, and willing. In addition to this, however, there are other abilities that are characteristic of the psyche, abilities that we could call psychic. And they're somehow outside the domain of traditional psychology, whether it be behaviorism or faculty psychology. It has traditionally in Western cultures been relegated to parapsychology or to religion. Now these powers and these abilities were studied by the ancient yogis, and you know as students of Indian philosophy know that in Patanjali's Yoga Aphorisms, chapter 3, he devotes a large portion of that chapter to the discussion of these vibhutis, that is, these marvelous powers. And commentators discuss many different categories of these powers. We're going to focus on two of them. First category, we could call intuition, intuitive powers, what we call extrasensory perception, and including in that the sixth sense, which is the mind. It's called the sixth sense because we can perceive things through our mind in addition to the five traditional Aristotelian five senses. Now these extrasensory perceptual powers you're acquainted with, familiar with: clairvoyance, clairaudience, mental telepathy. And you know how in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavad Gita, is related. Bhagavad Gita takes place, Krishna and Arjuna are in a chariot on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And there's a dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna which forms the substance of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, how do we come to have all that dialogue? Well, that dialogue was reported to the king of Dhritarashtra, who was the father, the patriarch of the Kauravas, one of these clans, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And he was born blind. And he was about a mile away on a hillock overlooking the battlefield. And one of his ministers, Sanjaya, was relating to him all the movements on the battlefield. He looked and saw Sanjaya had the power of clairvoyance. He could see the chariot and Arjuna and Krishna, and he had clairaudience. He could hear their dialogue. And so he reported that to the blind king. And thus the Bhagavad Gita unfolds. These are intuitive potential abilities in the psyche. Another interesting category, in Sanskrit they're called siddhis. Now, siddhis also means psychic powers, but of a much more physical and dramatic manifestation. And well, science fiction, we know something about these possibilities in the literature of science fiction. Talk about Superman, or the X-Men. But here we find that there's reference to some historical persons, well, maybe in the mythology of the Ramayana. You remember how Hanuman, who's like a superhero of the Ramayana, he was a great devotee of Lord Rama. And he had one of these siddhis. Siddhis, it's interesting that in the Patanjali, they list these. It's like a laundry list. Anima, laghima, prapti, prakamyam, mahima, tata, ishitvam, cha, vashitvam, cha. Like this, they go down, they make a list of all of these abilities. Now, Hanuman, the monkey god, he had some of these powers which he used in the service of Rama. And he was, one day, he had to get to Ceylon, cross over from the continent of India. How could he get from India to Ceylon? No bridge, there's no ferry. And so he had to fly through the air. That was one of his powers. And he was flying through the air, and up out of the ocean there arose a great Rakshasi. Her name was Surasa. And she was a man-eating monster. She rose up out of the sea, and she opened her mouth. She saw Hanuman come flying through the air. And as he saw this, he looked and he saw this mouth with these sharp teeth that was waiting for him. Hanuman called on another one of his powers, Mahima, and he expanded his body to great proportions. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. But Surasa also had his power. She did the same. The mouth got bigger and bigger. But at the very last minute, Hanuman shrunk himself to the size of a molecule, went right through her teeth. And thus he arrived safely in the battlefield of Sri Lanka. So example of a siddhi, of extraordinary power. In the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we read about two people, Chandra and Girija. Girija, both spiritual aspirants, both had acquired certain siddhis. Sri Ramakrishna went on one occasion to the garden house of Shambhu Malik with some devotees, stayed there till after the sun had set and it was dark outside. They had to return to Dakshineshwar temple, but they didn't have any lantern. And they left the devotees, they left in the company of Girija, and were having difficulty finding their way along the road back to Dakshineshwar. And Girija, seeing the difficulty, said, "Look, there's no problem. Just follow behind me." He moved up in front. He turned his back, looking at the group, and out of his back there came a great beam of light, kind of like a searchlight, that was sufficient to light up the whole pathway, the whole road ahead back to the temple. Thus they returned safely to the temple. Now these are examples of siddhis. Siddhis means like an attainment or an accomplishment. These powers, along with the intuitive powers, were recognized by the yogis, particularly codified by the great teacher Patanjali, who out of many different traditions compiled the first definitive source book on the practice of yoga. Swami Vivekananda calls his system Raja Yoga. And it's called, sometimes referred to as the science of yoga. It's called a science because it explains, what does a science do? One of the markers of a science is that it does not rely on, when it explains things from within, from its own natural powers from within an object, rather than calling on some explanation from outside. And for a long time, from ancient times, it was thought that these powers, that these were supernatural, that they were gifts somehow of the gods. How can we account for this? We can't explain it. There must be gifts of the gods. There must be some visitation of the muse. Some freak of nature. But the yogis, being scientific-minded in nature, they investigated these phenomena, and they came to some remarkable conclusions. The first conclusion was that these were not supernatural powers, but rather that these were potentials which were hidden, as it were, in the unconscious, in the psyche of man. And although they were not capabilities that were noticeable at first, nevertheless they were there. Just think of on your iPhone, you may find that there are some apps that are hidden, and you don't even know you have them. You may go to download them from the App Store, and you find out, well, no, you already have them. They're already installed in your phone. All you have to do is open them. You have to activate them, that's all. And so these students of Raja Yoga, they discovered that these powers were potentials inherent in the human psyche. Not only that, they discovered that they could be controlled, and they could be understood, and they could be brought back into consciousness, just as our heartbeat, for example, or our breathing goes on. We'd say, do I beat my heart? Well, in ancient times, they say, no, you don't beat your heart. Your heart beats because of Vaishwanara, who's God. God is the one who's causing your heart to beat and your lungs to breathe. You don't do it, and you agree because, it's not an act of will. But the fact is that yogis can bring this heartbeat power, that ability, can bring that back under control and into consciousness. And so they discovered that there was a methodology to control these abilities. Now, to the Raja Yogis, these powers were a mere curiosity. They were not interested in them. They had higher motives in mind. And so they took note of these, but they did not pursue them. However, there were individuals who became interested in these powers in particular. And this is the history. This is how the esoteric becomes the occult. Whole diverse traditions of occult sub-sciences developed. At that time, people didn't know. These these individuals pursuing these abilities didn't know how they worked, knew very little about them, what was their potential, and yet they worked on them. And time passed. And it wasn't long before the traditional Raja Yogis began to tell certain cautionary tales about the pursuit of the siddhis. Now, we know this from our Western tradition. You know, for example, that the myth of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, he had a brother, his name was Epimetheus, who was married to the first mortal woman. Her name was Pandora, and she was created by the gods. And every one of the gods gave her a gift of a wonderful positive power. But seeing as she was mortal, they also presented her with a secret box. And she was told, whatever you do, don't open this box. And, as soon as she got home, she opened the box. And out of it flew all of the diseases and the maladies and the troubles and the mosquitoes and everything in the world that torment us today. Kind of a metaphor. You remember the old folk tale about Jack and the beanstalk. That Jack traded off for some magic beans, planted the beans, and next morning he got up, he saw this beanstalk went all the way up into the clouds. And out of curiosity, he climbed up the beanstalk, wandered around, he saw a castle, went into the castle and saw all manner of marvelous things, among which was a hen that laid golden eggs. And Jack thought to him, wow, he just grabbed up that hen, put it under his arm, and he was going to leave the castle. Now, this was very bad. I mean, he wandered into somebody else's house, and he stole from them. Well, there's a giant. That giant woke up, and you know the rest of the story, how Jack had to flee for his life. You remember, too, the old poem that was written by the German philosopher Goethe, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Remember how a sorcerer, he left his workshop, and he left his disciple there to do chores while he was gone. And one of the chores was he had to fetch water from the well, bucket by bucket, carrying these heavy buckets. Disciple just didn't want to do that. He knew enough, he knew how to charm a broom. And he charmed a broom, told the broom to fetch water. And the broom obeyed, began carrying these buckets of water. But when it had enough water, Jack, the disciple, didn't know how to stop him. And soon the whole workshop was awash with water. It was only when the master returned that they were able to stop this catastrophe. So sometimes these powers lead to disastrous results. That was one of the tone of the cautionary tales. Another time they told these stories about these powers being used for being kind of useless, being kind of a waste of time, because after all, these are like skills. They don't just pop into your mind. You don't just suddenly wake up one morning and have this extraordinary skill or talent. You have to become aware that it's possible, just like learning how to swim. You become aware it's possible, then somebody has to teach you how to swim, then you have to learn how to swim, then you have to practice. There's a long investment process before you've mastered this, so it takes time. And the question then, is it worth it after all this time? Sri Ramakrishna tells about the sadhu who had attained siddhis. He was visited by a holy man who asked him, well, what power do you have? Well, it so happened that an elephant was walking by that way. And the sadhu said, well, you want to see my power? He picked up a pinch of dust. Holding the dust in his hand, he repeated the mantra, and he charmed the dust. He threw the dust onto the elephant, and the elephant just grunted and shivered and shook, and he fell down dead. And the holy man, seeing this, says, yes, wow, you have that power. That's amazing. Tell me, can you bring that elephant back to life? No problem, said the sadhu. Another pinch of dust. Threw that dust on the elephant. The elephant sugared and groaned and sugared and stood up. And there he was back to life. Brought him back to life again. Well, said the holy man, yes, you've done that. He said, but tell me, what have you gained? You're a sadhu. Your goal here is to gain enlightenment. How has this helped you to progress towards enlightenment? And the sadhu became thoughtful. Similarly, it was that there were two brothers. Sri Ramakrishna tells these parables. Two brothers. The eldest married, settled down in a home, and the youngest brother renounced the world and became a monk. And he was gone for 12 long years. And at the end of 12 years, the rules of monasticism tell that you can, at that time, you're allowed to return back to your ancestral home, visit your family. And so the younger brother returned, and the eldest asked him, well, what have you achieved after all this time? And the younger said, well, you want to see? Yeah, come and look. They walked. The river flowed past nearby. Went to the banks of the river. The younger brother said, say, watch this. And he walked into the water, and he walking on the water. He crossed over that river, landed on the other side. Hello, brother, did you see that? Meanwhile, the brother paid 1 penny to the ferryman. He crossed over on the ferry. And then he came back and said to his brother, well, did you see? You see what happened? Yes, he said, I saw what happened. But I'm wondering, you must have spent a long time developing this 12 years you've been working on this power. It seems to me that it's not really worth much. In fact, I don't think it's hardly even worth a penny, which is what I paid to the ferryman to cross over. So these are kind of the stories, the wisdom stories that are told by the traditions. Sometimes these powers, they say, can lead us astray from spiritual life and can lead to moral failing and to lead us into temptation, moral failing, loss of reputation, and even social scandal. Two spiritual aspirants visited Sri Ramakrishna, Chandra and Girija. I already told about Girija. Chandra was another who had acquired a siddhi. He would hold in one hand a little gutika, which means like a little ball of condensed herbs, a little ball of herbs and medicinal plants. And with that, he was able to make himself invisible. And he used to stand there in the courtyard of the Kali temple and watch devotees, unseen by anyone, watch devotees and lines of devotees come and go in the temple, listen to their conversation. And one day it occurred to him that Mathur Babu, that is one of the supporters of Sri Ramakrishna, had a daughter in his extended family. And it came into the mind of Chandra that he would render himself invisible and follow that daughter home one day, which is just what he did. Followed her home and into the inner apartments. Now there he was standing. He has access to these very secluded inner apartments. When what was his shock, when he began to feel that his mind was kind of coming down to a lower plane and he was losing control of his siddhi. Now maybe some of you have seen one of the versions of the movie versions of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One of those versions with Claude Rains. Dr. Jekyll is seated on a park bench with his fiancée. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, it's a wonderful day. And they're seated together on the park bench, and she's dressed in white, and he's a very fine doctor, he's a respectable gentleman. And his hand is lying on hers as they sit on the bench. And as he looks down, to his horror, he sees that his hand is growing hairs. That means he's turning back into Mr. Hyde. It used to be that he had to drink the potion, but soon it came that the potion, he didn't have to drink the potion anymore. He would shift back and forth. Similarly, it was Chandra. He found that to his shock and his consternation, he materialized. Everyone saw him, and they sounded the cry. Guard, security came, dragged him out. And he lost his reputation, and it became a great scandal. So this is the powers. These are kind of the words of caution. You remember Sri Ramakrishna, on one occasion, great yogis, if you attain the highest level of Raja Yoga, you may attain the highest power, which is called prabha, which means spiritual intuition. It's a power. Power means a position of ascendancy in which all powers will come to you spontaneously without working. So similarly to Sri Ramakrishna, he had all these powers, but he never used them. And one day, he asked his disciple, Naren, that is the future Swami Vedarupananda, he said, I have acquired many powers. I want to give them to you. I don't use them because I only do as I'm directed to do by the Divine Mother. I can't use them, but I could give them to you. Will you accept them? And Swami Vivekananda, he asked him his very astute question. He said, well, will they help me to realize God? Sri Ramakrishna says, no, they will not. But they may help you in your work. Vivekananda said, no, I don't want them. I don't need them. And he saw that Sri Ramakrishna, that is his guru, was very much pleased. So this is the psychic powers. Let's shift to our second subject here, psychic and the spiritual. What do we mean by spiritual? Well, spiritual means if you're a spiritual person, then you walk in the Spirit. And what is the Spirit? Well, the Spirit is just that immaterial part of yourself. It's the divinity within you, the God within you. the soul within you. It is your essence. The spirit is your essence. It is your essential nature. It is yourself. Now, in yoga tradition, that self, your soul, is called the Purusha. Pure consciousness. Independent of the body and the mind. In Vedanta, it's called the Atman. Infinite, immortal self-awareness. That's the self. What is spirituality? Spirituality just means that you have a sense that there is something greater than the material. There's something higher than the material, something higher than the intellectual and emotional. There is something beyond the relative world, something beyond the phenomenal world. You just have an intuitive sense that there is a higher reality. And you feel that within yourself, you also have within yourself a sense that you're somehow more than the body and the mind. And that in your true nature, you are not limited by the body, and you're not conditioned by the mind, but that you are a spiritual being. You are the spirit. It's not that you have a spirit, it's not that you have a soul, but that you are the spirit. That's a sense. That's an intuition. Therefore, you want to meditate in order to embrace your spirituality. So now let's look a little bit more, compare the two, the psychic and the spiritual. They differ, we can say, in the ends and in the means. Now let's look at that. The end of the pursuit of psychic powers, the end here is siddhis. Siddhi literally means accomplishment, an achievement. It's almost synonymous with the word vibhuti, which means a wonderful manifestation of divinity. And in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is entitled Vibhuti Yoga, and it talks about all of the amazing... See, Vibhuti here, Siddhi means, it's kind of a metaphor for anything that can be achieved. Any great... It's referring here particularly to psychic, but in an extended meaning, it means any power, any talent, any wonderful manifestation, whether it's secular or religious or mystical or spiritual. We look around us in the world, we see people have wonderful talents, wonderful abilities, and they can do amazing things. And these are called vibhutis. So it's with the purpose of achieving those that the psychic applies himself to some practices. Now these powers, we wouldn't call them spiritual powers. Even though they are wonderful manifestations, they may point to, that is any great achievement, kind of reflects perfection. It's like a finger pointing to higher perfection. But it is itself not the perfection. And therefore, in the pursuit of the powers, these powers being part of the body and are just development of the potentials of the body, of the senses and the mind, are really a pursuit of what we would call self-actualization. That would be the ideal. So in a larger sense, the goal of the psychics is to attain self-actualization, to fully actualize all the potential within your human consciousness. The goal, however, of spiritual life is self-realization. Self-realization means enlightenment. The goal of the spiritual aspirant is, he doesn't just want to become a better caterpillar. He wants to become a butterfly, be completely transformed. That's what self-realization means. In yoga, it's called kaivalya. It's the goal of all yogic practice. In Vedanta, it's called self-knowledge, or in devotional schools, God realization. This is the purpose of spiritual life. So the psychic and the spiritual, they differ in their ends, and they differ in their means. Now the means to attain these, to actualize these potentials, Patanjali lists 5 different means in the first verse of the 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutras. And the first means is that he mentions is some people are born with these powers. And now science fiction, we say, okay, like Superman, the X-Men, they're just born with these powers. We don't see examples of that anywhere. But we do see examples of people who have intuitive powers. And you know the examples of people who are, well, you know the life story of someone like Edgar Cayce, or maybe more interesting, is this Indian mathematician. His name was Ramanujan. Now Ramanujan came from a poor family, living in India. He had an amazing gift, and that he would, mathematical theorems and knowledge and equations would come to him like in visions. And he would he didn't even know what was happening. He was religious, but he wasn't consciously, intentionally doing sadhana. These things would just come to him. And psychics say that's kind of like he has a psychic opening. He has a portal in the mind that allowed for this inspirational insights to appear in his and he was stunned and amazed. And he would scribble all these notebooks full with these mathematical theorems. Later on, he was discovered by a Western mathematician and taken to Cambridge University in England. And there everyone was dazzled and stunned and amazed to see his thousands of theorems, many all solving all of these great mathematical problems of the 20th century. He had some problem because he had no formal schooling in mathematics, and therefore he couldn't work out the formal proofs. And so there's some difficulty of acceptance. But as time has passed, this was the turn of the century. Now time has passed. Over 800 or 900, as mathematicians work through these theorems of Ramanujan, 800 or 900 of these, they've derived mathematical proofs that they were all true. So that's the example of a psychic intuitive. Now let's compare, let's some other means. The other means that Patanjali lists are medicinal plants, like the fabled soma plant, really a mushroom. Another means is the use of tantric mantras. Another means is extreme physical austerities. Another means is to use a technique of Raja Yoga taken out of context and applied specifically to the development of this potential. These are the means of attaining these powers. Now let's contrast those with the means used by a spiritual aspirant, and we're talking here, our context this morning is Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is a very systematic, methodical progression through 8 stages, through 8 steps, beginning with moral and ethical culture, with spiritual purgation and sanctification, developing of spiritual virtues, asana, breath control, withdrawing of the mind, focus, concentration, samadhi. And ultimately, the goal here is not samadhi, the goal here is kaivalya, spiritual freedom. And this Raja Yoga is a spiritual path. What is a spiritual path? A spiritual path, in Vedanta, I can say, we can define it as any path which will eventually lead you to realize yourself. Or they could use the language of devotional language, to realize God, the ultimate reality. And so these are spiritual paths. So we can contrast these two means. So there's a difference then in the ends and in the means. These two, the psychic and the spiritual, also differ in their lines of development. Now, we have a model of the human psyche from the most ancient times. It seems as if we have 2 selves within us. You know the old story about the 2 birds on the self-same tree. There's a lower self, that is an ego. That's our everyday walking around personal self. And then we also have a higher self. We call it a soul. Really, we are the soul, but we're not identified with the soul. We're identified with our lower self. Now, this is a spatial metaphor of lower and higher. Now, using that spatial metaphor, we can draw a distinction between a horizontal line and a vertical line. The pursuit of siddhis, and by siddhis here, we can extend the meaning here to mean not just psychic, but to mean any talent, any perfection, manifestation of any skill, any ability. That it may be, well, children, a child is born, and the child naturally begins to activate all those abilities. He learns to walk, he learns to talk. Pretty soon he learns how to speak, learns how to think. And it may be even that child goes on to develop clairaudience and clairvoyance. So there's a long progression, but it's a horizontal movement. That is the personal self, the personal identity of that remains the same. One is undeveloped. At the end of the line, it's much more highly developed. But highly developed does not mean you're more spiritual. The development that's like an adult, has many more powers than a child. But we don't say an adult is more spiritual than a child. Similarly, it is someone who has even extraordinary skills, abilities, talents, and even psychic siddhis is not necessarily spiritual. There are great super psychics who had men of very ordinary moral character, who are not interested in soul, God, and religion. And there are great spiritual giants who had no interest in our abilities, who have psychic powers. You ask all the Swamis in the Ramakrishna order, do you have a psychic? Can you walk on water? And they'll say no. Do you know anyone personally who has this power? They'll say no. That's because there's no correlation between spirituality and the development of these potentials. The spiritual path this horizontal line of development can be contrasted with a vertical line. Vertical line is spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is called vertical because it's about transcendence of the ego. The process of spiritual life is radically different. It's about a change in your character, not just in your personality or your dramatic character, not even just in your moral character, but in your essential nature. That's why they say spiritual. You're spiritual when you are born again. Use the language of Christian theology. You begin to sense and become identified with a whole new identity. And therefore it transcends the personal self. We could call it our transpersonal self. The impersonal within us. That's the spirit. So let's conclude here with the psychic and the spiritual. The yogis teach us that these siddhis, these potentials really exist. That means they can be actualized. And they teach us that there are methodical ways. There are techniques of yoga embedded in the whole practice of yoga, which could be taken out of context and could be used to scientifically, systematically develop these powers. Just as you develop any skill or any talent, just as you learn to do anything. But to a spiritual aspirant, our primary interest is in spiritual growth and in enlightenment. For a person who's interested in enlightenment, these siddhis are not the end in view. They represent a different goal. Not only are they not the end in view, they are not the means to the end. These powers, just like any power or talent or whatever, are not spiritual per se. That means they do not, they're not of instrumental value in becoming more spiritual. And furthermore, these powers are in no way an indication that you are spiritual. So you hear somebody who has these, that's not what we mean by spiritual. In Vedanta, spiritual means yourself, your consciousness. To identify, to be who you really are. That's what spirituality means. That you identify with your true nature. And the only signs of developing spirituality are the development of moral and spiritual virtues, which enable us to achieve and to attain the goal of spiritual life, which, to put it in the language of devotional Christianity, that goal is to love God and Him only to serve.
From the one has come the many, in the many shines the one. Of all the forms there are not any that have not come from the one. Smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, the light beyond all darkness, the love within our hearts. In the stillness of the mountains, in vast skies of brilliant blues, in ancient worlds, in modern cities, that wondrous light of lights shines through. Brighter than the brightest, higher than the highest, deeper than the deepest, the love within our hearts. Across this world are many people, so many creatures great and small. We are all children of the Mother. She is the one who made us all. Beauty of all beauty, yet beyond both time and space, still dwelling in each moment, bestowing on us her grace. From the one has come the many, in the many shines the one. Of all the forms there are not any that have not come from the one. Smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, the light beyond all darkness, the love within our hearts. Smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, the light beyond all darkness, the love within our hearts. The light beyond all darkness, the love within our hearts.
The subject next Sunday is the blessings of Easter, and Prajaprana will speak. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantirehi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and on the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.